I was 12 years old. It was a few days before Thanksgiving. My mother was at the supermarket shopping for the meal, and I was home sick. I didn't feel right that morning, so my mother let me stay home. 2 Army officers came to the door, and I opened it and immediately knew what it meant. They asked for my parents, and I told them my dad was at work, my mother was at the store, and they conversed between themselves. They were discussing what to do since no one was here, and no one they could tell anyway. They decided they didn't want my mother to drive down the street and see the car. They were afraid of what would happen. So they asked me to take them to the supermarket where my mother was shopping for the Thanksgiving meal. So I got in the back of the car and we drove there. I walked in and by myself and found her in one of the aisles. And she was shocked to see me, and I had to say to her that there were 2, I think I said, Army guys to see her that wanted to talk to her. She had a bit of a meltdown right there. I remember turning to this woman standing next to her in the aisle saying, "There's Army officers to see me, and my son is in Vietnam." And the woman, she looked so distraught because she also knew what it meant. My mother walked away, and I grabbed her handbag because she wasn't even thinking, and we went outside, and they still wouldn't officially tell her. They drove us home. We came in the house, and that's when they officially gave the news that her son was killed on the 26th of November, 1968.
"27 Crusaders, they wore the red and blue, loved their days at Father Judge, up on Solly Avenue. Each of them defended this land we hold so dear."
What I call the DNA of Father Judge is that the patriotism that's been promoted and adhered to and captured and passion. It's a passion of that school.
All heroes, brave and strong, they live within
Kelly runs out the
each
clock,
one of us.
and the final score of the 27th Annual City Championship football game is Father Judge 19, Frankfurt 18. That's a happy Father Judge
Wearing red and blue, and each day they still walk the halls.
In the late 60s, early 70s, when the POW campaign started, one of the slogans was, "You are not forgotten." It really, we are compelled to never forget.
27 Crusaders.
When it comes to the Gold Star families, what they do is they try to create that awareness in, hey, these Gold Star families are here. Their loved ones, their son, their husband, their wife, their daughter, they passed away out of service for their country.
This land we hold so dear.
There is so much collateral damage to the families. Life was never the same. Our life became about death.
27 young men, all heroes brave and strong.
But I think that being able to express all of this now is very healing for all of us.
So they haven't really gone.
It's just the determination and the realization that Father Judge will never let those 27 guys be forgotten.
It's returning veterans and the need for housing that really causes Northeast Philadelphia to explode.
They were the kids who were just ordinary kids who came out of the Northeast Philadelphia. And I think in Northeast Philadelphia, I see rows of houses, red brick houses, gray stone houses, one connected to the other.
Large influx of people and housing developments and shopping centers and churches and schools.
It was a place where people identify themselves with the parish that they belong to rather than the street or whatever.
It was a growing community. I mean, I think we had 21 parishes that were feeding students to the school. The school had 4,000 boys in it around that time, but the neighborhood was made up of parishes. That's what we called the neighborhood, but there were different parishes formed basically a neighborhood.
In those days, when you named where you came from, it was always St. Matthew's, or St. Timothy's, or St. Dominic's, or St. whatever the parish church you were in. So they were Catholic kids who went to this high school because this was the thing to do, go to Father Judge High School.
That was the center point of your life because most of the students that came here, I would say every student that came here, went to grade school at one of these parish schools. And then you advanced on to Father Judge. That in and of itself, with 4,000 boys, you were developing different relationships through sports and different activities, but then everything did reside back on your neighborhood. We referred to things in those days as the corner, all right? It was the corner you hung on, whether it was Cottman and Frankfurt or Princeton and Hawthorne or where the schoolyard was, or in my case.
Pennsylvania is a blue-collar state, factories, coal mines, farming communities. Philadelphia reflects that, and the heart of working-class Philadelphia is the Northeast.
It's also different than many other American cities. Shortly after World War II, in most American cities, people begin to move to the suburbs. Since Northeast Philadelphia is so underdeveloped, there is suburban growth in the Philadelphia area, but largely people move into Northeast Philadelphia and delay that suburbanization until the 1980s.
1960s and 70s, the area around Father Judge, for instance, had become highly populated and highly developed. There were thousands and thousands of homes with young people that needed an education.
Growing up in the 50s and 60s were like two different centuries. In the 50s, it was carefree. Go to the playground. The only thing you worried about was being home on time for dinner and what did you have to do for homework.
The Northeast was unique in the 60s. It was a growing area. People from all over the city were moving in.
It was really wide open space at that time. Where I lived, just on the other side of Cottman Avenue. Literally was the end of the city. Cottman Avenue was 2 lanes with dirt shoulders.
We all went to Our Lady of Calvary Parish.
St. Bernard's.
The Torresdale section. We played our sports there.
Boy Scouts.
We worshiped there.
I grew up in the 50s and 60s right here in the Northeast. There was the Boulevard Pool. There was an amusement park right next to it on the corner. There was the Concord Dance. We hung out at different playgrounds, Folk Playground, Princeton Playground, and it was just like a fun place where all the kids hung outside and played wiffle ball and sat on the steps at night talking.
The neighborhood we grew up in,
it was nothing but fun. Great place to grow up.
Looking back on things, I consider myself very fortunate to have gone through my teenage years in Northeast Philly in the late 60s.
Growing up in our neighborhood was great. There were a lot of families, large families in fact.
Everybody had a lot of children, 10, 8, 9 kids in a family.
We were all a large family. We played together. We fought together.
In the neighborhood, everybody knew everybody's brother and sister, mom and dad.
The parents would not only watch their children, but they watched their neighbors' children.
It was a great neighborhood to grow up in.
Families were very active in their children's lives.
There was always something going on.
For instance, my father, he was the coach of my brother's baseball and basketball teams. family picnics, family parties and banquets.
It was all good memories for me. I don't remember a bad day.
Great sense of community.
There was no worries. You could always find a summer job. You could always find a part-time job.
Ball fields weren't that far apart, the baseball fields that is.
We were out on the streets all the time, either playing wire ball, baseball, box ball, anything.
Basketball courts weren't far away. There was always a street for touch football. There was only enough kids around to do anything. We'd ride our bikes all over the neighborhood. We built forts day and night. You name it, we did it.
My brother was the oldest of 10 children. And at the age of 18, he went into the Marines. And at the age of 19 or 20, he actually bought about 42 acres up at Bradford County in Pennsylvania. His lifelong dream was to open a hunting and fishing lodge. And he loved to hunt, he loved to fish, and that was his lifelong dream.
A lot of fun hanging out with the boys in the alley.
You just had this close group of friends that you hung around with from the time you were 5 to the time you graduated high school.
I go back to having a friend that lived at the corner, and we had the same party line. You talk party line to people today, and they don't know what you're talking about. And I remember we could just holler down the alley, Stanley pick up the phone, and we would talk on the telephone. I remember going to the dances at Boulevard Pool, and I remember leaving the dances, and Snocky would go right across the street, and he'd be home.
My parents were divorced. We lived with my dad. He worked 80 hours to bring us up in a middle-class neighborhood. My grandmother helped, but it was Patrick that really took us under his wing. Patrick was just your typical brother. He would play baseball with me. He would help my sister with her homework. He was a leader of the family, to be quite honest with you.
Ordinary kids. They were not the kids at the top sections, at the smartest sections, or they were not the kids at the lower section. They were the ordinary kids who came out of the Northeast Philadelphia.
The neighbors really got together.
We enjoyed one another. It was, we were always there for one another.
The neighborhoods were very safe. You know, you could leave your doors open.
If somebody did something wrong, the neighbors would tell the parents. So it was, you not only had your parents to worry about, you had all the neighbors to worry about as well.
It was a very close-knit community.
Neighbors got together when tragedy or whatever came about. The neighbors all contributed and helped and brought things to relieve them of miseries.
When my brother died, it was the neighbors all came together, and everybody just came together to help our family get through this. It was just a very good feeling to know that you had people to count on other than your family, that everybody was there for you to help.
It was a time when everyone really were concerned for one another. And I think that is one of the reasons why lots of times a lot of our students after graduation went into the military or went into the police or firemen because of that closeness that they had with their families, the closeness they had with their neighborhood, and the closeness they had with their God.
Whether it was the parish, the family, the corner, and the school. I'm going to say they were pretty much the drivers of your social life.
Besides the city needing to expand its own infrastructure to meet the growth of Northeast Philadelphia, the Archdiocese of Philadelphia essentially had to do the same thing. If you notice, many of the high schools east of Roosevelt Boulevard are built during or right after the post-World War II era. The same with the parishes.
The expanding Catholic population is reflected in the high schools that were founded in the Northeast, particularly high schools for boys. You had North Catholic in the lower Northeast that was founded in the 1920s. And then in 1954, Father Judge was founded, a Catholic high school for boys. And that pretty much served the majority of the Northeast until the establishment of Archbishop Bryan High School in the far Northeast in 1966.
One of the things that Judge was founded was to elaborate on the Christian principles. Not only Christian, but Catholic principles. And the main one that I think would apply here would be the love of God and the love of neighbor.
You also had high schools for girls, such as St. Hubert's in Tacony and Little Flower in the lower northeast, Nazareth Academy High School in the far northeast.
Parishes, existed up there, big parishes like St. Tim's and St. Matt's and St. Vincent's, but they were actually smaller churches and were either added to or whole new parishes constructed. Many of them actually by John McShane, the famous builder, because big parishes were needed. There was a massive expansion in population. So Catholic schools, Catholic parishes, Catholic hospitals all followed suit.
What did the Oblates of St. Francis de Sales and the Catholic school system of Philadelphia wanted from these young men that went to Father Judge High School? To be good Catholic Christians, to be people who lived their faith.
And the love of neighbor means that when our neighbor is in trouble and need help, that we go to it.
To be people who did what the Lord expected them to do, did God's will. We Oblates of St. Francis de Sales, we follow a particular individual saint, Francis de Sales, and to bring their spirituality, his gentleness and his humility to these young men, and have them become people who are truly lived out the Catholic faith as fully and completely as they can.
It's just the determination and the realization that Father Judge will never let those 27 guys be forgotten. We owe it to their families, we owe it to their friends, and it's just part of the loyalty and tradition, and it was instilled in us by our teachers and the Oblates at Father Judge, and we will never let it go.
Father Judge was founded in the mid-1950s. We have to remember that people still questioned whether a Catholic could be a citizen. During the Kennedy race for the presidency a few years later, that very question would be brought into play. But Catholic education at that time strongly advocated duty, patriotism, citizenship as really part of their curriculum, whether it was an elementary school, a high school, or a college or university.
With this expanding population throughout the Northeast, there was fertile ground for recruiters for the armed forces.
You want fast action, outdoor action, real man-sized action. Well, here's action that tops them all in the combat branches of today's Army. And now if you qualify, you can choose the action branch you want. Pick the artillery. Get in on the exciting missile and anti-missile field. Or pick the fast-moving armor. Work with the world's most up-to-date tanks. Or pick the mechanized infantry. The fast action branch for fast action outdoor guys. Whichever branch you pick, today's Army is the most mechanized freedom force ever assembled. So if you're for fast action, if you're an action kind of guy, take a long, strong look at today's Army.
And that became part of the reason why they were in Vietnam, I'm sure. They were people who were obedient to the state and to the church, and when they were drafted or were they enlisted, they went there to protect the country. They came from families where the fathers did exactly the same thing. I can remember myself as part of my career there at Father Judge High School being in charge of the Fathers Club and running the dances at the school. And the fathers were there taking care of those dances, helping the kids to behave. They were men who were like wanted their sons to be contributors to the church, to the school, and to society in general. Mm-hmm. They were good people. These kids came from fathers who were good men.
I entered Father Judge in 1966 as a freshman. And although the Vietnam War was raging 8,000 miles away, for us, life was pretty much business as usual.
Jim Snock and I were buddies in high school. We were close. I remember his personality was always He was a charmer. He was always fun. He was always funny. He was always going the extra mile to be funny. And being in the hallway with Snock was a blast. Being in a class with him was fun.
And I first went to Father Judge High School in 1961, and I taught these students 10 of these students who were killed in Vietnam. I taught them freshman algebra, 9th grade algebra. It was a school that we opened up at 8:30 and we were out of there by 3:30 with all the sports activities and other activities taking place after school. I can see the kids being athletic or watch the football players get dressed up and heading across the street to practice football, basketball, practicing basketball, baseball. These were all people. And again, I'm thinking of the people who were the coaches. They were men who were dedicated to helping the kids and getting the kids to be the best that they could.
The ones who went to Father Judge were more likely to end up in Vietnam than what their peers from Bucks County or from the surrounding counties in Philadelphia were likely to do.
There was a lot of hope for us. We were, graduating high school. A lot of guys were going on to college that, didn't happen a whole lot a few years before that. College was more attainable for guys. And myself, I was going into the Philadelphia Police Department. We had a lot going on. Just a real bright future. Look at the other side of it, and these guys that were just a couple years ahead of us were over in Vietnam fighting a war, and unfortunately 27 of our Father Judge people didn't come back from that war.
I was real close with Jim. When he heard I was going into the Marine Corps, he was a little mad at me. He says, "You're going to get shot." He says, "You don't want to go in the Marine Corps. Go in the Navy. That's what I'm going to do." But he didn't. At the last minute, he changed his mind, I believe, and he went into the Marine Corps. I heard he was in country. I was actually going to try to see if I could get down the road to see him one day. And I never got there, but then I heard from Donnie Wesner, another judge guy. He was a CB, and I saw Wesner over there, and he told me that Jimmy had gotten shot.
While I was at Father Judge, the Vietnam War was just starting to take off. And through my 4 years here, there was numerous occasions when somebody's brother or a former graduate had passed away in Vietnam in the war. And it was a very sad time. We didn't know much about the war at the time, but what most of us felt was the fact that we had parents that were in World War II, and it was basically our turn to step up and do something. Little did we know that we would end up there, but that was the feeling. We were all afraid of it, but we knew that, it may be our turn to do something. For me, once I got out of high school and I couldn't get a job, I volunteered for the draft and, ended up going into the Army. And shortly after that, I was in Vietnam myself. But it was a sense of duty, I think most of us felt, that if a push came to shove, it was our turn to step up and, do something.
The United States came to Vietnam initially as it supported its ally there, the French, who worked to retain their colonial possession.
French troops are fighting the last battle of a long war over what had been called French Indochina. It's a strange three-cornered struggle. Non-communist Vietnamese fighting communist Vietnamese, and some of
When the
both
French were
fighting
defeated in 1954, the United States, worried about the spread of communism throughout Asia, increasingly backed the government in Saigon, first under President Eisenhower, then under President Kennedy, and finally under President Johnson, who escalated America's involvement by committing troops and materials throughout the 1960s. It wasn't until President Nixon that the war in Vietnam came to a conclusion.
The service member serves, and it's a unique mission that they have. They are ready to accept the consequences of fighting in combat being injured, and potentially dying for their country. Their oath of office is simple. It's preserve and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It's not too dissimilar from members of Congress and the President of the United States. The difference here is they're prepared to give their life in service to their country.
Increasingly now, Americans are functioning directly in the fight for freedom in this far, foreign corner of the earth.
These young men went to Vietnam and gave their lives for the good of the country, to protect the country as they saw it. They were young men who were willing to do it, and that was pretty much the school. We were, if I had to put it in terms, we were traditional in our view. The school and the neighborhood and the kids. They were not anti-war. They were not people who, I can't see these kids that were here that would be against the war. They would do what they were expected to do, and they did it to the cost of their own lives.
But Americans risk and sometimes give all that they have, half a world away from home, because
I enlisted in the Air Force, and I knew that I had a 4-year tour, and I knew that it was going to be a long 4 years, and I knew that possibly during that 4 years, I may have to go to Vietnam.
Not an issue of politics. It is not an issue of ideology. It is an issue of service. Service members are prepared to fight and die. Nobody likes the thought, but it is a fact of life. But it is apolitical in the sense that it doesn't matter who's in office, and it often doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with the conflict. The issue is you are very committed to the training and you're committed to the mission, and the mission might send you in harm's way, and you should be fully prepared to know that that's the consequence, but you also should know that your brother in arms that trained with you and has been deployed with you or is serving with you in harm's way, each of you are prepared to give your life to protect the other. And that is a real interesting distinction as opposed to regular public service, that the life of a service member really carries an enormous risk and sometimes the penalty for the supreme sacrifice.
Present or future needs of the fight for freedom in Vietnam. They will be.
When we think about the Vietnam War, we think about the draft. 2/3 of the military that fought for the United States in Vietnam enlisted. These were kids who enlisted because their government asked them to. It wasn't complicated for them. Their fathers had fought during the Second World War. They grew up reading comic books, watching John Wayne movies, and understanding that their nation was in a war against communism. When their government asked them, they simply responded and said yes and went. It wasn't complicated at all, and it certainly wasn't nefarious.
When I went over to Vietnam, I was assigned to the 483rd Tactical Airlift Squadron, and our job was to deliver emergency supplies and other products to the base camps and to the airfields and to the troops that were in the field.
Let me talk a little bit about the call to serve, and it's not for everybody. Right now, about 6% of the United States population is a veteran, so it's not in large part. But today, if you take all the active duty military, all the Guard and reservists, it's less than 1% of the American population. So the call to serve is a small segment of our population that is serving to protect the greater good.
It's important to create a distinction between the service of a service member, whether it be a Marine or a soldier or an airman or a sailor, amongst ideology that have been created, whether it be about the government or society or religious perspectives or views upon war, whether it's just or unjust, simply because it takes away from that individual's service. Within the Vietnam War, a lot of individuals were drafted and a lot of them were enlisted. But bottom line, regardless, they rose their right hand and they swore to defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Then the impact also sometimes that's not realized is the soldiers in combat, the brothers in arms of that person. Most service members don't get the opportunity to grieve.
And the reason for that is because you have a mission. Within that mission, you have individuals to the left and right of you who help you achieve that mission. So it just becomes around between you and these individuals. You know they have your back and you have theirs.
Losing someone in combat, a friend, it's a big shock. At the time we were 19, 20 years old, had never really experienced anything like that in our lives. You develop close bonds and relationships. You depend on each other for your day-to-day existence. The bigger issue was that you couldn't dwell on it because you had a mission to complete. You had to get ready for the next mission. And the impact of these losses really didn't hit you until years later when you were home.
The public began to see the ones who went to war, and some of the reasons that were questionable in the policy making is the same thing. So consequently, veterans coming back were isolated. They didn't feel like they could talk about the war. They didn't feel like they could identify with the military or identify even as veterans. They basically had to come home in hiding, and it had a terrible effect on people who in some cases were suffering from exposure to chemicals, in some cases suffering from whether it was guilt or post-traumatic stress. They had to bottle all of that up after having given so much for their country in the first place.
Sometimes have asked me what it's like to be in combat in direct fire, under enemy fire. People want to know that, and you can see in the movies different descriptions or film or scenes or whatnot. The best analogy I've ever been able to give to somebody is if you could take a revolver, put a bullet in it, spin the revolver, put it to your head, and pull the trigger. That's what it's like. But to do that every day, day in, day out, that's one aspect of it. That's the individual aspect of it. Because most Marines, soldiers, SEALs, Navy, Air Force, whoever, air pilots who have been in combat, when they go out, they don't know whether they're coming back. They just don't. And that's an enormous, enormous amount of stress that goes on. The best way, I can't almost, it's so difficult for me to even tell you what that's like. That's why I use that analogy. It's the quickest way I can tell what it is like, spinning that. If you look at the movie The Deer Hunter, they were playing that game, spin. That to me was driving me crazy. I could not sit in that movie theater. I had to leave. Most people have no idea also, and maybe have some respect, that this notion of trying to understand that the next step, the next hour, the next 2 hours, the next day, you might not be here. And then you see somebody wounded. Somebody's right next to you, somebody's behind you, or there's a big battle and you see the body. We in the Marine Corps, we had ponchos, and we dragged them to get them out, okay, and wounded too. But you just get, over time, you kind of get hardened to it, I can say, but that's what keeps you going as a warrior.
They were afraid of dying, too afraid to show it. They carried emotional baggage of men and women who might die at any moment. They carried the weight of the world on their 19-year-old shoulders. And not many in the world knew their burden or cared very much. They carried each other. They did it fine. Remember the warrior, not the war.
Something that most people don't think about is the impact on families, the collateral damage of injuries and debilitating issues and death that carry on after the soldier or service member has passed on.
The day my brother was killed, a typical morning, we all went to school. My sister, my dad went to work. We'd still be able to come out for lunch, and was in 6th grade. I was 11 years old. My sister was in high school. I came home and walking up the street, and I'm noticing my family's cars, and I see my aunt's car, I see my uncle's car, I see friends that I know didn't live on a block, and their cars were there. And I remember looking over and saying to one of the kids I walked home with, "I'll see you after lunch." And I opened the door, and my whole family's there. My mom and dad are there. And what's the matter? And I found out my brother was killed. Our whole world changed. Family stayed with us. Seems like that house was full for forever.
I can remember the day my brother died. It was early on a Sunday morning, and my mother got a phone call asking if my parents were home. When she said yes, they hung up on her. Within minutes, a car pulled up, which she already knew was going to be happening after the phone call. And the parish priest came in and the military to inform her that he had died on November 8th, Friday. And my mother afterwards was telling me how she had a dream that night at the exact time that they told her he died. And she just knew. Of course, upset. And my father became withdrawn also. I had older brother and sister also. And so we all just had to stick together and get through it. And I just can't even imagine, because I have a grandson who's 20, and I just can't even imagine something like this happening, you know, in my life. But it did happen in my life, but with a brother, and it was very sad.
I remember the day that my brother died. I was working a night shift at American Airlines, and my sister and my mother's friend came to tell me, and they brought me home. And I just remember how devastated it was for my parents and for my siblings. It was a terrible loss, but I remember also that it wasn't that much. It wasn't a big shock, because when my brother and we took my brother to pick up his ride to go to base before he shipped off to Vietnam, and he said that he knew he could die, and if he did, he wanted to be buried at Arlington Cemetery. And then it's like adding that, you know, telling my parents that, and they fulfilled that wish of his. But it was just so much grief and sorrow that day, and it really hasn't stopped.
The impact of my brother's death was, as I'm sure all other families who have lost ones, was catastrophic. That was the worst day of my life, leaving me with the worst memories till this day. I was a junior at Father Judge. I was upstairs in my room doing my homework. Then all of a sudden I heard this horrific, ear-piercing cry from my mother, and I ran down the steps. She was screaming, literally pulling the hair out of her head, crying and screaming to the top of her lungs. My father crying and trying to calm her down, embracing her. I ran over to them. I said, "What's wrong?" And my mother, between her cries, told me that my brother was not coming home.
We had gotten the telegram the day before, on a Friday, that my brother Ed was wounded. So on Saturday morning, there was a lot of people at my house. My sister, who was married, and her husband, her 2 little girls, my mom, my dad, my brother, and myself. And I remember my dad, actually, it was a Saturday morning, so he was at work. So we seen the soldiers, they pulled up and they came to the door, and there was 2 of them. And they knocked on the door, we entered the door, and I remember them coming in and telling us they were sorry that Ed had passed away. Mom was hysterical. She was screaming, "My baby, my baby, my baby." My sister, Antoinette, went over to hug my brother Ernie because he was only 10 and he didn't know what was going on. And I was looking out the window, and I was very upset and also crying, but I looked out the window and I see my father pulling up in his car. He was just coming home from work. And my first thought was, my poor dad has no idea of what he is about to walk into, the nightmare that he is about to walk into. How his life was going to change in that moment. And I remember just thinking that and feeling so bad for him. And he came in, and I remember the soldiers kind of, when my dad walked in the door, backing up because I don't think they knew what my dad was going to do. But my father walked right over to them, and he shook both of their hands, and he thanked them so much for coming and letting us know this, what had happened and this information. So he was very grateful to them that they had come to our house. And of course, then he broke down also. It was just a horrible, horrible day. And all of our lives changed after that because, our family wasn't the same anymore. We were missing a member of our family. And it was very heartbreaking and very upsetting. And I felt so bad for my mom and dad and everybody.
Another thing I remember about when my brother was killed, it was my mom's birthday. A letter came home saying if my brother didn't see any action by April 14th, they were moving out, going back to base camp. 2 days later is when my mom opened the door on her birthday to 2 Marines. It took maybe 35 years had gone by since we'd be able to sing happy birthday to my mom. And even then, it was something we tried to ask her to do. Part of the healing process for us all. If my mom was smiling, blowing out candles, it was good for all of us.
It was very disheartening when it was a neighborhood guy that somebody you knew with and hung around with was no longer going to come home. And then I also had a few other friends in the neighborhood that passed away in Vietnam later on, and same thing. It was heart-wrenching, especially for their family, for their parents, and it was brutal. It was really brutal to hear about that.
We all huddled, we all embraced each other, we all cried. And going through my mind was the fact that I wasn't going to be seeing my brother again. And also, he was weeks away from getting married. I felt bad for his fiancée, and I'd just seen all of our plans gone.
I don't know if you know this or not, but early in the Vietnam War, many of these families were notified of the death of a son or daughter being killed in action by a cab driver or Western Union. And it took a while to get that process, being what they call the knock on the door, represented by representatives of their particular unit, or Army, Navy, whatever they served in, Marine Corps. That process became more formalized. So early on, it was terribly shocking, done with little care, little concern. even going forward, there was not much they could do because the families were so shocked. And usually, as I understand, it's in the morning. Again, we didn't know what was going on over here. We had no idea. And again, because there was very little communication, but these families were suffering alone. And that process became, let's say, more formalized as the war went on. That's what I know and understand.
Well, what I remember that day in November '67, when the men came to tell us that my brother had passed, I remember I was 10 years old, and I went outside because there was a little bit of snow on the ground. And I remember seeing the green Army car, had Army written on it, and 2 people in it, two men, I believe. And I remember being there, and when they started to come out of the car, I ran back into the house because I think I had somewhat of an idea that it wasn't good. Remember going in, I didn't say anything to anybody about it. And then the doorbell rang, or a knock on the door or something like that. And I remember them coming in, and I remember my mom there on the couch, and I remember standing there, and my sisters were there, and then they broke the news to us, and everybody started to scream and cry. And I didn't really scream and cry because of what they said. I just screamed and cried because everybody else was. And I remember my sister Ann coming and hugging me, telling me it was going to be all right, but it wasn't. I think I changed. I got quiet, never was the same. And then I remember my dad coming in, and I thought it was going to be even worse, because he walked up to the Army guys like he was going to do something, and one Army guy backed up, and he stuck his hand out and shook his hand and said, "Thank you for coming today." I was quiet like my brother, so it impacted my life because once the whole neighborhood found out, I must have had 100 friends because everybody wanted to know the story. When I went to school, people flocked and wanted to know the story. And of course, at 10 years old, what do you tell them, you know? I remember after we got medals and taking the medals to school, sharing them with teachers and students. And the family wasn't the same. And I believe my parents, for the next 6-7 months, couldn't even grieve because all they did was get medal after medal every month. They were getting another letter saying you have to come downtown to get a Purple Heart or a Bronze Star or a Silver Star, which he received. So it was hard for them to do that over and over again. And growing up, getting older, it sort of like went away. And then when I got older, I brought it back. I brought back all my brother's stuff, got it out, started reading letters. Because I wanted to know him, because I didn't know him that well. So that was it. I kept it all alive so that he could stay alive.
I remember vividly the day that they came to tell us that my brother had passed. My father and I were in the dining room, and we were sitting there. There was a knock at the door. And I remember so clearly that my father said, "Don't answer the door." And of course I looked at him, bewildered. I didn't know, I had no clue what was going on. So I went to the door, and I saw Marine soldiers standing there. They were officers, obviously, because they were in dress blues. I opened the door and I let them in. My father put his head down on the dining room table. He knew instantly what had happened. I didn't know. I was 9 years old at the time. At that point, my father got up from the table and he walked to the front door. I have to be honest, I don't know what transpired after that. I just remember being in such an emotional state that I ran out the back door and I literally jumped the fence and I went to a friend of mine to ask her, to tell her what had happened. Some time had passed. My friend walked me home. We went there. And that's when I found out that my brother had died in Vietnam.
Father Judge is such a big school and had so many students going through there. I didn't know all the 27, obviously, but there were a few that I was friends with when we were in high school at Judge, and that we lost. There was a few in my class in 1965 that we lost over there. I know Jack Bentz was somebody that everybody at school knew. He graduated in '63. Jack was such a big guy and a good football player. He played some baseball with us as well. He was one of the first fellows that I heard we lost over there. And when I realized that, you know, my life sort of changed, because all of a sudden that war and our country was in my mind because of the fellows that we were beginning to lose.
The morning that we were notified of my brother's passing, I could still remember it as it happened yesterday, and that was back in 1967. My mother, I was still in bed with me and my sister shared a room at the same time. We were still sleeping in bed, being ready to, I guess, be woken up for school. My father was in the bathroom shaving, and my mother was downstairs in the kitchen getting his breakfast ready. And she heard a knock at the door, and this was probably around 6:30 in the morning, I believe, if not somewhere close to that time. And I didn't hear the knock at the door. My mother left the kitchen and got as far as the dining room, and she could see that there was 2 soldiers at the door. She knew right then and there what was going to happen. She screamed for my father, saying, "John, John, there's a soldier at the door." I heard the scream. I woke my sister thinking that my brother was coming home, and, well, the scene was quite different. They were there to inform my parents that my brother was killed in action, and, you know, naturally the household was all woken up. It was pure hell, to be honest with you. My mother was so upset, my father had to call the doctor, who lived right around the corner. The doctor came around, gave my mother some kind of medication to try to calm her down. And I still remember that knock and that scream today like it happened yesterday.
One of the biggest memories I have coming home from Vietnam is Yeah, you know, I heard Jimmy Snock had gotten hit over there.
Of the people on this list, these names, there's only one of these young men that I saw.
Over in Vietnam, you would hear about guys who got hurt from home. It was the craziest thing. The word got around somehow. And I ran into a guy who was a CB, and he told me that Snock got hit in the head, and but he wasn't dead. That he was home and he was at the hospital, and I thought, well, he made it. I thought he was going to be okay.
He died in the United States here, and he was back in the States at the Naval Hospital in Philadelphia.
When I got home, I heard that he never woke up, and that he was still at the hospital, and that his mom went there every day to see him. And he had a twin brother, Frank.
In school, his twin brother and he were two good men, young men, very good to the school.
And I can remember just thinking how bad it must have been for Mrs. Snock, because they were a real close family.
When I saw him, I did what I could as a priest, what I was expected to do as a priest, pray for him, and I remember him still in my prayers.
He was just a fun-loving guy. I don't remember when he died. I never heard when he died. I didn't want to knock on the door. I felt intrusive.
Here we are taking ammunition and medicine, mail. We would take food supplies, milk, all the essentials. And inevitably, we would land at a base, and it would be after action. And they would have wounded, and they would have KIAs, killed in action, troops that had to come back. And of course, if we were going back, we had the task to bring those bodies back. The bodies were always lined up by the runway, so we would land and we would taxi around, and they were on stretchers. They were in bags, and most of the time they were draped in flags. They were always handled with the most reverent care that we could. We knew and we respected the men that we were moving. They were treated very carefully.
I was a member of the United States Marine Corps Burial Detail. We were there to honor our fallen comrade. After the ceremonies, we would remove the flag from the casket, fold it, and give it to the family, followed by a 21-gun salute and taps. When taps went on, it's a very emotional scene. People were crying, young kids, high school kids, and even myself. It's hard to describe, but it was a very difficult time. Being on a burial detail was a very emotional thing for me. It was very difficult to see the parents, the grandparents, his friends, his neighbors, burying a young man like him, just out of high school. I can't imagine what it must be like for them, because for me it was very emotional, and I had tears coming out of my eyes when we had to do it. I could go back to the barracks that night, but they had to go home and remember their friends for the rest of their life.
If freedom is to survive in any American hometown, it must be preserved in such places as South Vietnam. And as President Johnson has pointed out, it is up to us.
There is so much collateral damage to the families. Life was never the same. Our life became about death.
It is really traumatizing to send youngsters, especially. In the case of the Vietnam War and Father Judge, the average person of many of the folks that died in combat was maybe 20 years old, 21 years old. Really youngsters, barely reaching their prime. And for an unpopular war like the Vietnam War was, it's even more impactful because the folks aren't really sure why they were going and what the mission was. And then to lose that person in combat in a war that was unpopular, that most people wanted to forget, makes it difficult for that memory sometimes to live on. The trauma of having to have that casualty assistance call where a priest and a military person comes to your door, your family's door, and has to announce that your son or daughter, in this case mostly sons, were missing in action or killed in action, is really debilitating. And the after effects of that, the loss of a loved one is significant, but the impact of that on a family member, lasts for decades.
So Vietnam, to me, was like a storm that blew through the area, and if it hit your house or your home or your family or your friends, it was devastating. If the storm didn't touch your family or friends, then it never happened. But Vietnam blew through and stayed with us forever, and I still think about Billy to this day.
There's the guilt factor, which I think is one of the more debilitating conditions that go on, which is why him, why not me? My buddy took my mission today, that should have been me. People were injured, I came back okay, why not me? Those are all traumatizing and debilitating impacts that seem to last a long time. And of course that casualty call on the family member is not insignificant. And the memory of someone that is just barely out of school when they are just on the cusp of adulthood, about to make an impact on themselves and a family, really can't be fully recognized or appreciated by the average citizen.
My brother was buried in St. Dominic's Cemetery, and it was a dreary day. It was a cold day, and he had the full military honors, the 21-gun salute, the planes flying over. But the memory that has stuck with me my entire adult life was of taps. I cannot hear taps without crying. I can't even talk about it right now without welling up.
It was 2 weeks, we were waiting for my brother's body to come home. It was always quiet. There wasn't any real conversation, no back and forth. It was almost like if we talked, we weren't feeling or thinking about my brother. My dad, I never saw my dad cry. My mom was just heartbroken. It felt like the world just went black and quiet. You didn't hear much.
Okay, well, as a result of my brother's death, I think there was always this underlying depression and sorrow and all this grief that we all carried, but didn't really express that frequently. And it's not, we had celebrations and joy, but there was always that feeling of loss because my brother was no longer with us to celebrate, and that his life was cut short, as were so many others.
Mike was a father figure, along with my Uncle Billy, because their dad died at the age of 35 when my Uncle Mike was 8. So we had 3 younger siblings, my dad, Dennis, my Aunt Mary Ann, and my Aunt Kathy. So when Michael died, it wasn't only their brother that died, it was their father figure. So it was a devastating effect to them, and obviously my grandmother, who had lost her husband when she was only 32.
Aside from, the emotional anguish of losing your son, the fact that it happened 2 days before Thanksgiving meant that we didn't celebrate Thanksgiving that year, and we absolutely never, as a family, celebrated Thanksgiving again. It was so close to Christmas that there was no Christmas that year, and there was never a tree put up again. As a kid, it was devastating for me, and of course I'm seeing this through the selfish eyes of a 12-year-old, but to lose your brother and to lose normalcy, to lose the things that everybody else had going on, celebrating these holidays was really difficult.
The youngest son was my dad, Dennis. So I directly dealt with the aftermath of my Uncle Mike's death. My dad never fully healed from losing his dad and his next father figure, Michael. My dad was actually sent to Canada because my Uncle Billy was in the Air Force at the time. My Uncle Mike was killed, and my grandmom sent my dad to Canada. Now, at that time, there was a lot of psychedelic and a lot of things going on in the world, and my dad got into drugs, and he got off of drugs and found Jesus and became really involved with that, met my mom. But he was still never fully healed. Soon after he had me and my sister, he got on the drugs and living a life that he knew was wrong because he could never deal with my Uncle Mike's death or losing his father at such a young age.
Well, they were totally upset and for me and for themselves because they never thought that was going to happen. You know, and never talked about going to Vietnam, never said much. I guess he thought, you know, he was just going to get it over with. He was planning to get married when he came home because he was engaged to his girlfriend. And he was planning on getting married and all. So that's what I imagine he was always thinking of for when he came home.
Unfortunately, his life was cut short at the age of 21, and that was never fulfilled. My parents kept that land for probably up until about the last 20 years they sold it. We as a family would go up there, and I'm not even sure why we would go up there, but it was just empty land. But we would go up there, I think probably because my parents felt close to my brother there, because they knew that was his dream. And I think we would drive 4 hours in a station wagon and just look at that land. And we would drive back for no reason. And now I think back now, I think my mom and dad just wanted to be close to my brother. And I feel really sad that he never, ever fulfilled that dream. And I think he would have been a successful man. And it's sad that we lost him at such an early age.
In my family, the death really became the core item of our life. There was a visit to the cemetery every day to care for the grave. I think it was a way for my parents to feel like they were parenting in some way. There was not really the allowance to be happy. It felt like we were, I don't know, I would feel guilty having a good time for many years afterwards. And for me, these were my teen years, so it was hard. It was really difficult to live through that.
My brother's death had a profound effect on me and my family. I was a sophomore at college, and I talked to my dad about joining to get revenge. And it was just so hard. Franny was younger than me, just younger, and it put a gap in the family for me. I felt from that time forward I didn't have a connection with the family until years later. I then swung to wanting to not go, and then wanting to go, arguing with myself all the time. It was hard.
But I think that being able to express all of this now is very healing for all of us.
They will place their names now in a new Hall of Heroes, created here in the Pentagon as a memorial to all who have earned their country's
Gold Star families are those that have really having to bear the burden of the loss of a loved one. There have been too many, obviously in every conflict. In the case of Vietnam, more than 58,000, and another 1,800 that are still unrecognized. Gold Star families have had to live with that burden ever since that casualty assistance call came, when usually a member of the clergy and a military member had to come and announce the news to this family member that their service member, their son or their daughter, was lost in combat. The best that we could do in their behalf is to remember them through these memorials. Hopefully, in most cases, we're able to bring back the remains so they could be properly remembered and buried here.
The mothers, the fathers, children, because in remembering them, we let them know that we understand the sacrifice they've made, that we understand what they have given to this country, that we understand the pain and the sorrow and the heartache that they've had to endure well beyond the day when they were first notified. This pain lasts forever. Someone very dear to them has been taken away and has left them with a terrible void for all of their lives. And they remember what life was like before the loss. And they remember those children and those sons and daughters. And thank goodness that we are able to at least show them the support that they need.
Gold Star families did not get a lot of support during the Vietnam era. It was such a fragmented time in America, and so many people were fighting not to go. So many people were starting to understand that this was not the kind of war that World War II was. And it was so hard to feel that you had made this sacrifice of giving your child, your brother, to something that really we weren't going to win and didn't make any difference in the world.
These families, nobody, as far as I know, they've told me, nobody has spoken to them about this tragedy in 50 years. If you remember, we didn't have the communication and support systems that we have today, When they were given those notices, when those people came to knock on the door, the Marines, Navy officers, Army, when they knocked on that door, very often those families were left to themselves to deal with the aftermath, the conflict, the turmoil, because nobody can tell the story better than they can. And we're trying to acknowledge that loss. They have PTSD. We didn't know it then, but we know it now. They have to live with that for the rest of their lives, and it's destroyed some of the families, as far as I know, and other families too, whether they be from Father Judge or around the country. Any family that's lost a son or daughter, they're never the same again.
Because they carry not just lingering memory, but they carry a message for the rest of us to remember and to never forget the service borne by our military members.
When it comes to the Gold Star families, what they do is they try to create that awareness in, hey, these Gold Star families are here. Their loved ones, their son, their husband, their wife, their daughter, they passed away out of service for their country.
These lovely ladies to my left are true sweethearts. These are the Gold Star mothers, and if you'll please stand and give them a standing ovation. It's Mother's Day coming up. We wish from all of us a happy Mother's Day to them and know in heaven, because I know the spirit of the 27 are here today. Wishing all happy Mom's Day. With all us veterans, they stay with us forever. For those that aren't aware, the Gold Star mothers gave their sons. We'll forever remember them.
They try to ensure that they collectively get together in this group to not only support one another, but to raise awareness and help meet the needs of these families, because their direct husband or wife or son is now gone, and that completely is ripped away from their entire existence. And what about that family? You know, you take into the aspect of somebody who might have had 3 or 4 children, or even 1 child and a wife. What happens to that person when they were the sole provider? That family needs to continue and move forward, and these Gold Star families and that organization really help support that.
It tells the family that society hasn't given up on them, that our society cares about their sacrifice and their family's sacrifice.
It lets them know that, hey, we're together, we're going to do this together in that unity and support, because when it comes to that collective connection, you know, it's another part of assisting in that grief and loss that has been made.
I think that, and this is true universal for any Gold Star family, so the memorials give them a chance, at least a way that we can acknowledge that pain.
The Gold Star Family Memorial Project was started by the Herschel Woody Williams Medal of Honor Foundation. Woody is a hero from World War II for actions on Iwo Jima, and he realized at some point that there were no tributes, no memorials for the Gold Star family members, those family members who lost loved ones in sacrifice to our country. The program itself, I believe, started about 10 years ago in West Virginia, was the first monument. The second monument was at the Freedoms Foundation in Valley Forge.
The Gold Star Family Memorial. These are very important memorials for the reason that they're not to commemorate those who have served, but rather to commemorate the sacrifice of the families of those service people and the sacrifices they continue to give, especially if they've lost loved ones. This is the second one ever established in the United States, and they really are to assist families and acknowledge families and their importance of sacrifice that they've conducted over the years.
Woody's objective, the objective of his foundation, is to have at least one Gold Star Family Memorial in each of our 50 states. The one at Washington Crossing National Cemetery was the first in a national veteran cemetery, and we hope there'll be many, many more. I believe that so far there's about 40 Gold Star Family Memorial monuments already dedicated. There's more in the pipeline, and again, the objective is to have at least one in every one of the 50 states. These are important tributes to those family members who have lost a loved one in sacrifice to our country. It's a place for those loved ones to contemplate their loss, but to understand that Americans support them, that Americans feel for their loss, and wish that we could do more every day to help them get over and to deal with the loss that they've sacrificed.
The United States Armed Forces and the great nation.
There were more memorials in our area, whether it be the Vietnam Veteran Memorial in Washington, D.C. Philadelphia Vietnam Veterans Memorial has 648 names, I believe, of those that lived in Philadelphia, one of which is a Medal of Honor winner.
The Philadelphia Vietnam Veterans Memorial, located at Penn's Landing in Philadelphia, honors the sacrifice of 648 men that were lost in the Vietnam War. We hold on Veterans Day and Memorial Day probably two of the largest ceremonies in the city, which brings veterans and their families together to reflect on the sacrifice of these young men. The Philadelphia Vietnam Veterans Memorial offers the opportunity for individuals to come and not only recognize the sacrifice of the 648, but also to learn about the Vietnam War and to put it in context. We have tried over the last several years to bring other monuments down there that tells the story of Vietnam. For example, we have the South Vietnamese Freedom and Heritage Flag Monument, which recognizes the joint sacrifice of the American and the Vietnamese soldiers. We have the Corporal Michael J. Crescent's statue, which honors the only Philadelphian from Vietnam to win the Medal of Honor. And we are currently raising funds to build a national POW MIA monument which will honor those from the Vietnam War. We believe it's the only monument, as far as we know, in the United States that will honor the POW and MIAs from the Vietnam War.
Delaware County Veteran Memorial in Newtown Square that lists everyone back as far as, I think, World War II. A monument that's going to be at the Father Judge will recognize 27 people.
Good evening. Reverend clergy, honored guests, friends, neighbors, and our Father Judge family.
The Memorial Judge is very important because it serves as a rallying point actually for the entire judge community, from the students on up to the alumni who have gone before the students till this day. In my opinion, it was also a rallying point to form a stronger alumni. It also, from the student standpoint, I believe it illustrates to the students the opportunity they have before them, because those 27 on the wall and even other veterans often didn't have the same chance before that they had to build a better life. And also it serves as a reminder of what I call the DNA of Father Judge, is that the patriotism that's been promoted and adhered to and captured in passion. It's a passion of that school. That 27 has been something they've all gathered around as part of this memorial. So it served a need in the past, and it's going to serve as a rallying point in the future.
These are not just physical monuments, which they are, but they serve a purpose of inscribing in stone, in many cases, those names that gave the ultimate sacrifice.
Remember the day of my brother's service. Long ride up here, kind of really didn't want it to end, because when we got here, we knew this was the time of peace, and our family was pretty much going to be going back to their respective places, and me and my sister and my mom and dad will be starting our life without my brother. It was kind of a overcast day, and I remember the Marines were up on the hill there. Not as many graves as there are here now. That was 50 years ago. And as a kid, I didn't know what to expect. My father in the military, he might have known what to expect, but and all of a sudden you can hear the guns locking and loading, and you could feel each volley of the 21 gun salute, and then there was some silence.
In 2001, the Father Judge Alumni Association bought the Vietnam Moving Wall to Father Judge High School. The reason we wanted to do that was to bring closure and give comfort to the parents and friends of the 27.
It's a replica of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. The moving wall is a quarter scale of the wall that is in Washington, D.C. that has the names of 58,278 names, all scaled to 1/4 inch. The moving wall was placed down the east side of the high school It was a signature moment for Father Judge in terms of recognition of the memorial and honoring the 27 who paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Most importantly, he's what we call a judge guy, and it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Jimmy Carlin.
Thank you. I was proud to be part of that ceremony that day, and it was well attended by politicians, many priests and teachers from Father Judge, and of course there was even many Gold Star families. One in particular I remember is Mr. Bentz.
I remember one night John Bentz's dad was here in his wheelchair, and he was up in years, and he wasn't doing well, and he was with his daughter Patty and other family members, and he just couldn't thank me enough for bringing the wall here because it gave him a chance to visit with his son John.
It was a solemn day, and it's something I will never forget, and I think that people that I have come in contact with over the years still remember that day. It ignited what appears to be a great interest in the memorial, and something to honor and pay tribute to, and it just continued over for the years.
The graduates who came back and said, "Thanks for doing this. It gave me a chance to be with my friend." For instance, there were Judge graduates who left here in 1968 and never returned, and so their classmates would come by here at 4 o'clock in the morning, say they just wanted to spend a few minutes with, John or Pat or pick a name, and they would stand out. The wall ran 252 feet along the side of the school, and they would stand out there and smoke a cigar, maybe drink a beer, and they said they were sharing time with their friend who they never got to see again.
At the closing ceremony, we had some alumni that addressed the audience. I was one of them. I had a great opportunity to talk about some classmates, as did other alumni.
Again, we just got so many letters and phone calls and in-person thank yous for giving parents a chance to come and spend time. They said it was a chance for them to spend time with their son who, left here and never returned home.
This memorial was created without public funds. It was created by families and friends. It all started with the dream of a wounded vet, Jan Scruggs, who used his life savings of $2,599 to help seed this fund. It was built with envelopes full of nickels and dimes. The average donation was $17.99. It was our own memorial, just like the war became our own.
Memorials, monuments, these things are important simply because they allow individuals to honor other individuals' memories. Nothing has meaning unless the meaning you give it. So if you don't put a meaning behind it, it kind of takes away that sacrifice, especially in the context of war.
They are tremendous physical representations with names etched in stone. They're places for family, friends, and neighbors to come, see the name of a lost loved one, and maybe remember a little bit about them or how they were, because in most cases they were very, very young, never having a chance to develop a family and or a career. But more importantly, they tend to be facilities, locations that can offer not just that peaceful, quiet area of reflection, but also serve as a foundation for some education and training for our youth. So kids in grade school and high school come there on school visits. They get small tutorials about the history of the flag, the history of the Constitution. Maybe they get to see a name etched in stone, but they also talk about how important and impactful it is to be a member of the United States military and the sacrifices they gave for their country.
but we are capable to find meaning in anything that life gives you. George Patton has a famous quote. He said, "It is wrongful to mourn the dead. Rather, we should thank God that such men existed." And that was a way for him to honor and memorialize the men who died, because even though it's difficult to not mourn them, you know, you can't take for granted 1 second what these men and women have died for in their sacrifice.
Memorials also remind us of what could be. Many of these soldiers, Marines, whatever, on the memorials never had the chance that we had. And in some respects, it could serve as, in my opinion, serve as inspiration of what can be achieved, especially to younger people. And that's why it should be honored. That's why the schools, colleges should pay homage to these memorials, actually provide an education as to what should never happen again, to the extent possible.
Father Rouse just informed me that Mr. Bentz is here. Mr. Jack Bentz, and also Mr. and Mrs. Ed Sikowski are also here. And any other parents I might have missed, if you'll please rise for a moment. Again, the parents of R27. We salute you. We will remember your sons forever. We will never forget.
I think it's important to remember these 27 for a lot of reasons. Number one, they were our friends. They were from our families. But I think it's important to recognize their loss and the hope that we'll never lose 27 again on a needless war. You would hope that those 27 at least serve as a reminder to be careful before we send boys off to war again.
How do I feel about the kids at this time in my life? I'm an 86-year-old man, and I still think about these kids. I think about the fact that they took on this responsibility. Even though the statistics were not in our favor, they still took on this responsibility and went to Vietnam. They did what they were asked to do. They were people who were patriotic, honest American, Christian, Catholic men, and they did what they were expected to do. And I still think about them. I pray about them. That's what I can do, and I hope someday I meet them again when I make that passageway to the other side where they are now.